Elon Musk enters store. What he does next leaves all stunned. The door to the convenience store chimed as it opened, and a figure stepped in, unnoticed at first, blending into the usual hum of everyday life. It wasn't until he moved deeper into the aisle, brushing past a stack of snacks, that the ripple began. Elon Musk, casually dressed in a simple black t-shirt and a button-up shirt, strolled into the store like anyone else. The ordinary nature of his arrival only made his presence more intriguing. Here, in this small suburban store, he was just another customer, picking through shelves. The store was quiet, the typical midday rush of customers milling about, picking up essentials for the day. It was the kind of place you wouldn't expect anyone famous to walk into. Most people didn't look twice, but there was an undeniable change in the air when Musk's figure became more recognizable. Whispers spread like wildfire, soft at first, but gaining momentum quickly. I think that's Elon Musk, isn't it? Really? Here? In this store? By the time Musk reached the refrigerated section, the hushed tones were no longer whispers. They were a soft murmur weaving through the aisles. A few people turned their heads, squinting in disbelief. They were all wondering the same thing. Could it really be him? For a moment, it seemed like an impossible question. Why would Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur behind Tesla and SpaceX, be here in this small-town convenience store? No security detail, no press, just a man casually picking out snacks. But that was part of the intrigue. There was no announcement, no grand entrance. Just a regular man, in the midst of a store full of people, silently moving through the aisles. Musk picked up a bottle of sparkling water, glanced at the label, and placed it back. Then he turned toward a shelf filled with bags of chips and crisps, his fingers brushing lightly across the different brands. He moved methodically, as if he had all the time in the world. His presence began to command the room, drawing the eyes of customers, but none of them dared to approach him yet. Behind the counter, the young clerk, a woman in her 20s, had noticed him almost immediately. She blinked, unsure if her eyes were deceiving her. Elon Musk here? Of all places? She watched for a moment longer, unable to resist the urge to confirm. Her gaze locked onto his as he casually scanned the snacks, and a small spark of recognition lit in her eyes. It was unmistakable. Her heart raced a little as she excused herself from the register and stepped into the aisle, trying to act casual as she approached him. She didn't want to be obvious, but she couldn't ignore the surreal nature of the situation. She stood a few paces away, collecting her thoughts before making her approach. Musk didn't seem to notice her at first. His attention was fixed on the snacks in front of him, though his sharp eyes flickered occasionally to the people watching from the sidelines. It wasn't paranoia. He'd been famous for long enough to understand the effect he had on people. It was just part of the package now. But he wasn't in the mood for the usual fanfare. The clerk cleared her throat softly, and finally Elon turned his head, meeting her gaze with a quiet, almost disarming smile. "Hi," she said, forcing herself to sound calm, though she couldn't hide the surprise in her voice. "Can I help you with anything?" He paused for a second, giving her a look that felt like he was gauging her reaction. Then, with the same easy smile, he answered, "No, thank you. Just browsing." There was no rush in his voice, no urgency. He seemed entirely at ease, like this was just another stop on his day. But to her, it felt different. This wasn't just another guy off the street. This was Elon Musk, standing in front of her, as if he were just another customer. The disconnect between who he was and the reality of the situation hit her for a moment, leaving her frozen. She recovered quickly and cleared her throat again. "Sure, no problem. Just let me know if you need anything." Elon nodded, and she walked back toward the register, but she couldn't help but look over her shoulder to steal another glance. The sight of him standing there, so unremarkable yet undeniably famous, struck her again. This was no celebrity trying to draw attention, no lavish lifestyle paraded for all to see. It was simply a man in a store doing something mundane. And yet, the effect was electric. As the whispers grew louder and more frequent, she realized this moment was something more. It wasn't just Musk's presence. It was the quiet disruption of an ordinary day. People were starting to notice, their eyes darting between one another, trying to determine whether this was a publicity stunt, an illusion, or something else entirely. Elon continued his search down the aisles, completely unaware, or perhaps fully aware, that his every move was being watched. He picked up a bag of chips, inspected it for a moment, and placed it back. His calm demeanor, his unhurried pace, gave the entire store a feeling of suspense, like the calm before a storm. And it wasn't lost on the people around him that this moment, this brief and simple exchange, could be the catalyst for something bigger. As the murmurs about Elon Musk's sudden appearance began to swell in the store, there was one customer who wasn't so starstruck. Toward the back of the store, standing near the canned goods aisle, a man watched Elon with an intensity that stood out from the curiosity of the others. He was in his mid-30s, dressed in a worn jacket and jeans, his face hidden by the hood of his sweatshirt. His eyes, however, were fixed on Musk with an unmistakable disdain that cut through the casual atmosphere. This man wasn't interested in a celebrity sighting. No, he had a different agenda. He had been in the store long enough to see Musk enter, but it wasn't the shock of a billionaire shopping at a local convenience store that held his attention. It was something deeper, something personal. He had been struggling for months now, feeling like the world had forgotten him, that people like Musk, wealthy, powerful, and influential, had no idea what it was like to live in his shoes. The man had worked multiple low-wage jobs, barely scraping by, and as he observed Musk moving through the aisles, picking things off the shelves like any other person, an anger began to simmer in his chest. For him, Musk represented everything that was wrong with the world. The inequality, the system that favored people like Musk while people like him were left behind. The billionaire might have been a public figure known for revolutionizing the future, but in the man's eyes, he was just another out-of-touch millionaire, far removed from the struggles of the everyday worker. As Musk reached for another product on the shelf, the man's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to let this opportunity pass by. No, today would be different. He would finally confront the man who, in his mind, epitomized everything that was broken about the world. He pushed through the aisle and walked up to Musk, closing the gap quickly. His voice cut through the air like a sharp knife when he finally spoke. "You know, you're not the only one who lives in this world, right?" Musk looked up in surprise, his brow furrowing slightly as he took in the stranger's tone. He hadn't been expecting this. He opened his mouth to respond, but the man continued, his words quickening with anger. "Must be nice, huh?" The man sneered. "Walking in here like some regular guy, shopping for your fancy coffee while people like me struggle every damn day just to make ends meet. You don't know what it's like. You don't know what it's like to fight just to survive, to watch people like you get everything handed to them while the rest of us get nothing." Musk was taken aback by the sudden aggression. He had experienced this type of hostility before, but it was different now. The anger wasn't just pointed at him. It was the culmination of months, if not years, of frustration. The man's hands were shaking with the intensity of his words, and Elon could see the deep, raw emotion behind them. The store's atmosphere had shifted again. The casual nature of the moment was gone, replaced by a palpable tension. The customers who had been watching from the sidelines were now slowly starting to pay more attention. Some stood frozen, unsure of what would happen next. Others discreetly moved toward the exit, sensing that the situation was escalating. But Musk didn't react immediately. Instead, he remained calm, trying to gauge the situation. The man's outburst wasn't entirely unexpected. It was a reminder of the very divide that had always existed between the haves and the have-nots, but it wasn't something Musk was used to confronting face-to-face. "Look," Elon started slowly, trying to maintain his usual composed demeanor. "I understand that things are tough for a lot of people, but coming at me like this isn't going to change anything. I'm just here to get some coffee. I'm not the enemy." The man's eyes widened, his lips curling into a bitter smile. "You're not the enemy?" he spat. "You're exactly what's wrong with this world. People like you, people in your position, you don't give a damn about people like me. You think you can change the world? You're too busy building rockets and electric cars while people like me are drowning in debt and working endless hours just to stay afloat." Elon paused, his gaze steady as he took in the man's words. He had heard it all before. People blaming him and others like him for society's failings. It wasn't a new argument, but there was something about this moment that made him want to listen more than usual. Still, he wasn't prepared for the next words that came out of the man's mouth. "I bet you wouldn't last a week in my shoes." "Not 1 week, Musk. Not a single day." The challenge hung in the air between them like a dare. The crowd around them had begun to murmur again, and it was clear that this was no longer just a random encounter. This had the makings of something much larger, an emotional standoff that was starting to feel personal. For a moment, Elon stood still, the weight of the man's words hitting him hard. He could feel the eyes of the store on him, some waiting for him to back down, others hoping he would engage. But instead of reacting with his usual calculated precision, Musk did something different. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving the man's face. "I'm not here to prove something to you," Elon said, his voice now steady but firm. "But I do understand the frustration. I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to see that things can be different." The man let out a harsh laugh. "Different? How? When people like you have it all, and people like me are stuck in the mud, struggling to keep our heads above water." The tension in the store grew, and the clerk at the counter watched the two men exchange words, her heart pounding. She had never seen anything like this before. The energy in the store was palpable. Everyone was waiting for something to snap. Elon's eyes never wavered. "You're angry," he said quietly, his voice holding an unexpected weight. "And you have every right to be. But blaming me isn't going to solve anything." The man clenched his fists, his face flushed with anger. "You don't get it, do you? You'll never get it. You're so far removed from reality, you can't even see the problem." The tension in the store was suffocating. Customers stood frozen, unsure whether to step in, to act, or to leave the scene altogether. The noise of the man's words echoed off the walls, amplified by the unnerving silence that followed. All eyes were on Elon Musk and the man who had confronted him, the confrontation turning from a moment of casual surprise into something much more intense. Musk hadn't expected this. He had entered the store for a quiet, personal errand, but now it seemed as if everything had shifted. The man's face was flushed, his chest rising and falling with every sharp breath he took. He had started out angry, but now he was furious. His hands balled into fists at his sides, his eyes glaring at Elon with an intensity that bordered on contempt. "You think you can fix the world, Musk? With your fancy cars, your rockets, your little projects? You're not fixing anything. You're just buying time for yourself while the rest of us drown." The man's voice was louder now, the frustration and bitterness spilling over. His gaze never left Elon's face, and there was a kind of rawness to his anger that made the atmosphere heavier. Elon stood there, his own expression steady but contemplative. He had dealt with his fair share of public scrutiny, but this was different. This wasn't a polite protest or a group of critics talking from behind a screen. This was a person in front of him, someone who felt betrayed by the very system that had, in his eyes, put men like Musk at the top while leaving people like him to suffer at the bottom. "I never said I had all the answers," Elon said, his voice calm but with an edge of firmness. "But that doesn't mean I'm not trying to do something." The man scoffed. "Do something? What, send people to Mars? Build more cars that most of us can't afford? What are you really doing? Because it sure as hell doesn't look like you're helping the people who need it most." Elon's eyes flicked to the side briefly, his mind processing the man's words. He wasn't wrong about the divide, the inequality that existed between the haves and the have-nots. There was no denying that. And Musk knew that the solutions he worked on, advancements in technology, sustainability, space exploration, were often far removed from the struggles that everyday people faced. But that didn't mean he didn't care. It didn't mean he hadn't considered the people who felt left behind. "Yeah, I know," Elon replied, taking a step forward. "I know it's not perfect. It's not as simple as just flipping a switch. But..." "Stop!" the man shouted, cutting him off. "You can't fix this by just throwing more money at it. You want to change the world? Start by looking at the people around you. The ones who've been forgotten. They don't care about your damn rockets. They don't care about electric cars or all your innovations. They're just trying to make it to the end of the day without falling apart. You've built an empire off of other people's suffering. Elon blinked, the man's words landing like a punch. There was an undeniable truth in what he said. Musk's own rise to power, his wealth, his influence. It had all been built on the backs of people like the one standing in front of him. People who worked hard but never saw the same level of reward. He had always been aware of the divide between the wealthy and the poor, but to hear it stated so bluntly was jarring. The clerk behind the counter had stepped back, unsure whether to intervene. She had never seen a confrontation like this before, especially not in her small store. And with the crowd slowly gathering around, she could feel the pressure mounting. The situation was becoming more uncomfortable by the second. "You think I'm just here to ignore all of this?" Elon asked quietly, his voice quieter but still firm. "I didn't start any of this to get rich. I did it because I believe in the future, because I believe in solving problems that matter. That's why I'm doing this, even if it's not going to change everything overnight." The man scoffed again, shaking his head in disbelief. "You're missing the point, Musk. It's not about how many problems you solve with your gadgets and ideas. It's about the people who can't even afford the basics. Do you think they care about space travel when they're working 2 jobs just to pay rent?" Elon's brow furrowed. The man was right about the struggles that millions of people faced. It wasn't just a matter of technology or ambition. It was about equity, about making sure that the advances made didn't just benefit the elite but reached everyone. He had always prided himself on being a disruptor, someone who could change the world. But the question now was whether those changes were reaching the people who needed them most. "I never said everything was perfect," Elon repeated, his voice taking on a different tone now. "But I've always believed that you have to keep pushing forward. That doesn't mean ignoring the real issues. It means making the world better, bit by bit. I'm trying to do something that's never been done before, but I'm not blind to the realities people face." The man laughed bitterly. "You think you're some kind of savior? Some hero who's going to fix everything? Well, newsflash. People don't need heroes. They need change. Real change. The kind that doesn't come from a boardroom. The kind that doesn't require billions of dollars to even begin." Elon felt the sting of those words. He wasn't used to being questioned like this, not directly, not in this raw, unfiltered way. It felt like the man was challenging everything Elon had worked for, everything he believed in. And there was truth in his challenge. In all the technological innovation, in all the advancements, there had been a glaring oversight. The need for systemic change, for addressing the core issues that affected ordinary people every day. And the more Elon stood there, listening to the man's angry, desperate voice, the more he realized that he couldn't just keep building rockets and electric cars and hope that the world would fall into place. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. People needed more than promises. They needed action, real, tangible change that affected their lives on the ground level. "I'm not perfect," Elon admitted quietly, his gaze softening as he looked at the man. "And I know I've got a lot to learn, but I'm not backing down from trying to make things better, even if it's not how you want it to happen. I'll keep pushing, even if I don't have all the answers." The man's eyes narrowed, his jaw set. He wasn't done yet. "You don't get it, Musk. You think you can solve the world's problems by throwing money at them, by launching fancy projects that no one can reach. It's not about that. It's about us. The people who live here, who work here, who struggle here. We don't need your charity. We need you to listen." The tension in the store was palpable, and Elon felt it in every fiber of his being. The words the man had thrown at him were raw, personal, and painful, and they struck deep. He had come into the store expecting nothing more than a quiet, mundane errand, but now it felt like everything had shifted. His usual calm, calculated demeanor was being tested in a way it hadn't been before. This wasn't about business, technology, or space exploration. This was about the divide between 2 very different worlds, one that Musk had become so accustomed to, and another that the man in front of him had been trapped in for what seemed like his entire life. Elon took a deep breath, trying to center himself. His instinct was to retreat, to explain, to rationalize. But something in the man's voice made him want to stay in the conversation, to understand the frustration that was being laid bare in front of him. The raw anger, the bitterness. It wasn't directed at him personally, but at everything he represented. It was a challenge not just to Elon's identity as a businessman, but to the very ideals he had built his life and companies around. The man stood in front of him, his fists clenched at his sides, his posture rigid with defiance. He had stopped shouting, but the fire in his eyes remained, flickering with unspent emotion. His words hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. "You think you can fix everything with technology?" The man spat, his voice low now, almost threatening. "Do you even see what's happening outside your little bubble? Do you see what people are dealing with every day? People who don't have the luxury of building rockets or playing around with self-driving cars. People who can't even afford to keep the lights on." Elon opened his mouth, ready to speak, but the words didn't come. He could feel the weight of the man's accusations, and for the first time in a long time, he felt vulnerable. Not because he was afraid. Elon Musk wasn't afraid of confrontation, but because he knew there was truth in the man's words. It wasn't the first time someone had challenged him, but it was the first time he had heard it like this, unfiltered, up close, raw. The store had gone quiet, the few remaining customers frozen in place, watching as the exchange unfolded. The clerk behind the counter had stepped back slightly, unsure whether to intervene. The situation was spiraling, the tension between the two men escalating with every passing second. Elon could feel the eyes of the room on him, but he didn't look away from the man in front of him. "You know," the man continued, his voice dripping with venom, "you're not some genius, Musk. You're just a guy who got lucky. You're riding a wave that doesn't even belong to you. People have been busting their backs for years, struggling to make ends meet, and here you are, parading around like the savior of the world. But you're not. You never were. And you'll never understand what it's like to be us." The anger in the man's words was no longer just aimed at Elon, it was aimed at a system, at a world that had left him behind, at the very idea that people like him had no place in the future that Musk and others were building. It was a condemnation, a rejection of everything that Elon had ever tried to do. Elon stood still for a moment, his mind racing. He knew that nothing he said could truly make the man understand his perspective. The gap between them was too vast, too deep. But there was something about the way this man spoke, the conviction, the bitterness, that made Elon want to reach across that divide. The problem wasn't just that people felt disconnected from the world of technology. It was that they felt completely forgotten. It wasn't just about solving big problems in space or engineering. It was about solving the problems that were right in front of him on the ground, in the very communities that had no voice. Musk took a step forward, but his voice remained measured. "I know you're angry, and I understand why," he said quietly. "I'm not blind to the struggles of people. I never was. But it's not just about the flashy projects and the headlines. I want to help, but I know it's not enough. I can't do it alone. The whole system needs to change." The man didn't flinch, didn't react. He stared at Elon, his expression cold. You can't just throw words at the problem and expect it to go away. You can't just tell people you want to help and then go back to your ivory tower. Change doesn't come from people like you. It comes from the people who live this every single day. The ones who are forced to watch from the sidelines because they don't have the money, the resources, or the connections to make a difference. There was a harsh truth in what he said, a truth that Elon couldn't ignore. His whole life had been about innovation, about disrupting industries and changing the way things were done. But the people who had helped him along the way, the ones who had built his empire, had been left behind in the dust. They were the ones who kept things moving, who did the work while others reaped the rewards. And in the pursuit of progress, he had lost sight of them, the ones who needed help the most. "I'm not pretending to have all the answers," Elon said, his voice softer now. "But I'm here because I know we have to do better. I know the way things are going isn't enough." The man's eyes narrowed, his anger not subsiding but shifting in intensity. "Better? How? By making more money? By creating more stuff that only a few people can afford? You're so out of touch with what's really going on, you don't even see how big the gap is." You think throwing some technology at a problem will fix it. But people need more than that. They need something real. The words cut through Elon, sharper than he had anticipated. This wasn't just an argument about technology, about his companies or his ambitions. This was a confrontation about the very nature of progress, about whether it was truly benefiting everyone, or if it was only serving a select few. Elon looked at the man, his mind racing, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "I know I can't change everything overnight," he said slowly, his voice tinged with frustration. "But I've spent my life trying to make things better. I know it's not perfect. I'm not asking for a pass. But I can't just ignore what's in front of me." The man scoffed, stepping closer. "You think you can fix this with just more of the same? You're fooling yourself. You're fooling everyone. You think you can keep pretending you're part of the solution, but you're the problem." Elon didn't respond right away. His eyes met the man's, and for the first time, there was a flicker of doubt. This wasn't about winning the argument, about proving who was right. It was about a fundamental truth. Progress could only be built on the foundation of understanding, of truly listening to the people who had been left behind, who had no voice in the world Musk had spent his life shaping. The man's challenge hung in the air, unaddressed, unresolved. The crowd around them was growing restless, sensing that something was about to happen. The situation had gone from a casual encounter to something deeper, something that could not be ignored. And with every passing second, the tension built, pressing them both into a corner where words were no longer enough. The store seemed to close in around them, the space shrinking as the confrontation between Elon Musk and the man grew more intense. Every word from the man felt like a weight, each accusation hitting harder than the last. Musk had heard criticisms of his work before. He was used to being the target of backlash, especially from people who felt they were being left behind. But something about this moment, about the raw anger in the man's voice, struck a chord with him. It wasn't just about the usual complaints. It was the kind of anger that came from feeling betrayed, from watching the world change without being part of that change. Elon felt the heat of the moment intensifying, not just from the confrontation but from the eyes that had gathered in the store. People were starting to edge closer, unsure whether to step in or simply watch as the two men stood locked in a verbal battle. Some had moved toward the back, trying to avoid the escalating scene, but others had gathered in small clusters, their attention fixed on the confrontation that was rapidly spiraling into something deeper. The man's chest was still heaving with emotion, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His face was flushed, the veins in his neck visible as his words came faster now, more frantic. "You don't get it. You're just a symbol of everything wrong with this system. You can't fix it, Musk. You can't fix what's broken by throwing money around and pretending you're changing the world. The only thing you're doing is making it harder for people like me to even stand a chance." Elon's expression remained calm, but internally, the frustration was building. He had spent his life trying to innovate, to create solutions to problems he saw as the future: sustainability, space travel, clean energy. But this was different. This was the anger of someone who had been living in the shadow of progress, someone who saw Musk's empire as a symbol of their own failures. The man wasn't just accusing him of being out of touch. He was accusing him of being part of the very system that had kept him down. And, for a brief moment, Elon felt like he had no answers to give. "I'm not pretending I have all the solutions," Musk said, his voice quieter now, though there was an underlying steel to it. "But I am trying. I'm trying to make things better. I know it's not easy. It's not instant. But I don't want to be part of the problem. I'm not just some rich guy sitting back and enjoying the ride. I'm trying to change things." The man scoffed again, shaking his head in disbelief. "Change things? You're so far removed from reality, you wouldn't even know where to begin. You think that building a rocket to Mars is going to fix the problems here? You think your electric cars are going to fix the people who are struggling just to put food on the table? You're so wrapped up in your little world, you don't even realize that the rest of us don't have the luxury to care about all your high-tech ideas. We're just trying to survive, Musk. And you don't give a damn." The anger in the man's voice was growing louder now, echoing through the store. Some customers shifted uneasily, a few of them glancing at the door as if considering whether to leave, but none of them dared to make a move. The clerk behind the counter stood still, her face pale as she watched the confrontation unfold. She had no idea what to do. This wasn't the kind of situation you learn to handle at the cash register. "I get it," Elon said slowly, trying to regain control of the conversation. "I know what it's like to feel left behind, to feel like the world is moving without you. I know that. But the problems we face aren't simple, and they're not going to be solved overnight. We can't just sit back and hope things will get better. We have to keep moving forward, keep pushing for change." But the man wasn't listening anymore. His eyes were wild now, full of the kind of desperation that only comes from years of frustration finally boiling over. "You don't understand. You don't get it. You've never had to worry about how you're going to feed your kids, or how you're going to make rent at the end of the month. You've never had to work your ass off just to survive, only to watch people like you get richer and richer while the rest of us stay stuck in the same goddamn place." Elon felt the sting of the man's words. It was true, he had never lived the life the man was describing. He had never had to worry about where his next meal would come from or whether he could make ends meet. His life had been one of privilege, of opportunities that had propelled him forward. And though he had always tried to make a difference, it was clear that the reality of others had never fully clicked for him, not in the way it needed to. The man's voice dropped, but the anger was still there, simmering. "You don't get to sit here and tell me about change when you've never had to face what I faced. You don't get to come into a store like this, pretending like you're one of us, when you have everything handed to you. You think I care about your little car company? Your stupid rockets? No, you're just another rich guy pretending to care. But you're not listening. You're not changing anything." Elon stood still for a moment, his heart racing. The words hit harder than he expected. And yet, in a strange way, the man was right. Elon had spent so much of his life focused on solving big problems, solving problems that could change the world. But he had failed to listen to the people who were most affected by the world's broken systems. He had failed to truly hear the struggles of those who were left behind. But just as the weight of the situation began to sink in, the man wasn't done. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. His voice, now quiet and biting, dripped with disdain. "You'll never get it. You'll never understand what it's like to fight just to survive. And you won't change anything. You'll just keep pushing your agenda, while people like me are stuck in the muck, struggling to keep up with a system that's rigged against us." Elon didn't respond right away. The anger in the man's words, the sheer frustration, had caught him off guard. For a moment, it felt like the whole store was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The silence stretched on, broken only by the occasional rustle of someone shifting nervously in the aisles. Finally, Elon spoke, his voice calm but filled with an underlying resolve. "I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not pretending I know what you're going through. But I'm not going to stand here and pretend like I'm part of the problem. I'm trying to do what I can. I'm trying to help make things better. Maybe I don't have all the answers, but I'm not going to stop." The man shook his head, his expression hardening. "You're not listening. You're not hearing me. You think you can change the world with your ideas, but it's more than that. You need to start with the people, Musk. Start with the people who've been forgotten. Until you do that, you're just another part of the problem." And with that, the confrontation seemed to hit a standstill. Neither man spoke. The store, still holding its breath, waited for something to break the silence. The tension between the two men was palpable, hanging in the air like a charged wire, ready to snap. The store had become a pressure cooker. The only sounds were the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the distant shuffle of feet. People stood frozen in their spots, watching the showdown unfold. The clerk at the counter had stepped back, her hands clutching the edge of the register, unsure whether to intervene. Everyone in the store, from the regulars to the newcomers, had become part of this moment, whether they wanted to be or not. Elon stood silently, his eyes locked on the man in front of him. He had heard the words, processed the frustration, the raw emotion. It wasn't just an attack on him as an individual, but on the entire system that he had become a symbol of. The man had laid bare everything that Elon had spent years trying to fix, and everything that still hadn't been fixed. It was a reminder of how far the divide between the privileged and the disadvantaged truly was. And while Elon could have easily tried to dismiss it, to offer one of his typical answers that people would expect from a billionaire, something stopped him. The anger from the man, his fists still clenched at his sides, was more than just personal animosity. It was a cry for help, for recognition, for something real. It was the kind of frustration that couldn't be solved with a quick fix or a press release. It was deep-rooted, born from years of being overlooked and forgotten. Elon could feel the weight of it pressing against him, and though he was used to confrontation, this was different. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a reckoning. The man, his chest rising and falling with each breath, seemed to sense that Elon wasn't going to back down. But the anger still burned in his eyes. "You still don't get it, do you?" he growled. "You think you can change the world with your flashy projects and your tech toys. But you've never lived in my shoes. You don't know what it's like to wake up every day and feel like you're invisible, like your struggles don't even matter." Elon's thoughts were racing. He had heard versions of this same sentiment before, on social media, in interviews, even from his own employees, but this was different. This wasn't someone shouting from behind a screen, hiding behind anonymity. This was a man, right in front of him, confronting him with everything that was wrong with the world. And despite his wealth, despite his power, Elon realized there was nothing he could do in this moment to fix it. For a long moment, the two men stood there, neither one willing to look away. The man's voice had softened, but the edge was still there, buried beneath the anger. "You don't understand what it's like to feel like you've been left behind. You've been talking about Mars and electric cars, but what good is that to people who don't even know if they're going to have a roof over their heads tomorrow?" Elon remained silent, but his thoughts were a whirlwind. He had always tried to push forward, always aimed for the stars, figuratively and literally. But in doing so, he had neglected the very people who had helped make all of it possible. The man was right. He couldn't even begin to understand the struggles of the people who lived paycheck to paycheck, or worse, those who didn't even know where their next meal would come from. He had become so focused on solving the big problems that he had lost sight of the small, everyday struggles that define so many lives. The man's eyes narrowed as if sensing Elon's internal struggle. "You talk a big game, Musk. You say you're trying to fix things. But the world doesn't need another tech genius, another billionaire building a rocket. The world needs change, real change. The kind of change that doesn't require a fortune to access. The kind that doesn't leave people behind." Elon took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. His mind was still spinning, but something in the man's words had finally broken through the noise. This wasn't just an angry outburst, it was a call to action. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Elon wasn't sure what the answer was. In the back of his mind, he could hear his advisors, his team, telling him to stay focused, to keep moving forward, to continue pushing the boundaries. But right now, in this store, all of that seemed distant. The grand visions of space travel, of electric vehicles revolutionizing transportation, seemed meaningless when compared to the reality of what this man and so many others were facing every day. "I never said I had all the answers," Elon said finally, his voice low but firm. "But I know we can't just keep doing things the way they've always been done. We can't keep ignoring the people who are struggling, who are being left behind. You're right, the world needs real change. But I don't know what that looks like yet." The man snorted in disbelief. "So what? Now you're telling me you don't know? After all the talk, after all the projects, now you admit you don't know?" Elon looked at him, the weight of the moment settling deeper on his shoulders. "I'm not pretending to have all the answers. I'm not saying I know how to fix everything. But I can't keep pretending I'm not part of the problem either. I've been so focused on the future that I've forgotten about the present. I've forgotten about the people who are living here, right now, struggling to survive." The man looked at him, his expression unreadable. For a moment, the anger faded, replaced by something else. Something that looked almost like resignation. But then it was gone, replaced once again by that simmering frustration. "Words," the man muttered. "You're full of words. That's all you've got. We don't need your promises, your apologies, your bullshit. We need real action. We need you to do something, not just talk about it." The challenge in the man's voice hung heavy in the air. Elon could feel the weight of it pressing against him, demanding something more than just the usual rhetoric, more than just the promises of a better future. And for the first time, he wasn't sure he had the answer. But that didn't mean he could walk away. That didn't mean he could ignore the challenge. The man's words had cut through the surface, and now it was up to Elon to figure out how to respond. The silence in the store stretched on, thick with unresolved tension. The crowd remained still, their eyes bouncing between the two men, waiting for something to happen. Elon was aware of their gazes, of the fact that everything had become about this single moment, about this conversation. It was no longer just about a billionaire and an angry man in a store. It was about the divide between the world's systems of power and the people who were left behind by them. The man finally turned, his back now to Elon, the anger still burning in his every movement. Without another word, he stalked toward the door, the tension still hanging heavy in the air. As he left, the chime of the store door echoed loudly, and a heavy silence followed. Elon stood there, unmoving, as the realization settled over him like a weight he couldn't lift. The world wasn't going to change just because he wanted it to. It wasn't going to change because of the work he had done or the tech he had built. The man's anger was real, and it wasn't going to go away until the deeper issues, the systemic problems, were addressed. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt unsure. The work ahead of him wasn't just about launching rockets or innovating industries. It was about addressing the inequalities that had been ignored for too long. Elon stood in the middle of the store, the weight of the confrontation still hanging heavily in the air. The man who had challenged him was gone now, leaving behind nothing but the aftermath of their heated exchange. The tension that had filled the room slowly began to dissipate, but the questions it raised remained. For the first time in a long time, Elon found himself questioning his own role in the world, questioning the impact he was really having. The customers who had been watching from the sidelines now began to move, slowly returning to their own tasks, their conversations a little quieter, a little more subdued. The clerk behind the counter remained frozen, her eyes still locked on Elon, her expression a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Elon didn't know what to say. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, like something had shifted permanently, something that couldn't be undone. He had been challenged in a way that he couldn't ignore. The anger, the frustration, the accusations. The man's words had cut through all the noise and had landed squarely in the center of Elon's heart. He had spent so much time trying to push the boundaries of technology, to create a future that was better for everyone. But in doing so, he had lost sight of the people who needed that change most. The man had been right about so much, about how disconnected Elon's world had become from the everyday struggles that so many people faced. And the reality was undeniable. Elon couldn't fix everything with innovation and progress alone. The clerk stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, her voice laced with concern. Elon looked at her, her question hanging in the air for a moment before he nodded. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking." She hesitated, as if unsure whether to press him further, but then spoke again. "I didn't expect that. I knew people had opinions, but that was intense." Elon smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Yeah, it was. He couldn't simply continue building rockets and cars. The world needed more than that. It needed change on a level that transcended innovation. It needed equality, it needed opportunity, it needed action that directly impacted the people who were struggling, the people who felt forgotten. The decision to step up was not an easy one. Elon had spent so many years focused on the future, on space and electric vehicles, that he had neglected the immediate challenges that people faced every day. The system was broken in ways that no amount of technological innovation could fix. It needed to be restructured. It needed a leader who would recognize that the future wasn't just about building the next big thing. It was about making sure that everyone could be part of that future. As the moments passed, Elon's thoughts became clearer. He knew now that he couldn't ignore the voices of people like the man who had confronted him. He couldn't simply walk away from the world's inequalities, from the frustrations that simmered just below the surface. He had to do something more than what he had been doing. He turned to the clerk, a sense of resolve settling in him. "I'm going to do something about this," he said, his voice firm, but filled with a new sense of purpose. "It's not enough to just create new technologies. It's not enough to just solve the big problems. I need to focus on the problems that are here, right now." The clerk blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Elon continued, "I've been building for the future, but I need to start addressing the present. People like him, the ones who are struggling, they need help now, not in some distant future. We need to focus on change that actually affects their lives." She nodded slowly, the realization dawning on her. "You're talking about real change." Elon's eyes hardened with determination. "Yes. I've been so focused on reaching the stars that I forgot that the ground beneath me needs attention too." Elon walked toward the door, the store's chime ringing as he left, his thoughts already set on the next steps. He had a long way to go, but for the first time he felt like he was on the right path. The clerk watched him leave, her eyes thoughtful, and for a brief moment, she felt like she had witnessed something significant, something that would echo far beyond the small confines of the store. Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur, had just been shaken by something deeper than tech. He had been confronted with reality, the reality that sometimes the biggest changes start with the people closest to us. As Elon walked out into the sunlight, the weight of the world felt a little different. The future was still there, waiting, but it wasn't about building something grand, it was about fixing what was broken first. And that was the beginning of something real.